Smurl's Predecessor. The Manson Haunting unveiled Chapter 1. The arrival. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling Victorian mansion that stood tall and imposing at the end of Elm Street. The Manson family's car pulled up, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway. John Manson stepped out, stretching his limbs after the long drive, his eyes scanning the grandeur of their new home. "It's perfect," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Clara, his wife, wasn't as convinced. As she stepped out, a cold breeze sent a shiver down her spine. "It's quaint," she remarked, her eyes darting around uneasily. The mansion, though beautiful, had an air of abandonment, with ivy creeping up its walls and windows that seemed to stare back like lifeless eyes. Lucy, their youngest at 7, clutched her teddy bear tightly, her blue eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Daddy, why is it so cold here?" she asked, her breath visible in the chilly air. John shrugged, trying to brush off the unease. "It's an old house, sweetie. Probably just needs some warming up." As they began unloading their belongings, the family dog, Max, a usually fearless German shepherd, began to growl softly, his gaze fixed on the house's entrance. John tried to coax him inside, but Max refused, barking aggressively at an unseen entity. Inside, the house was a maze of corridors and rooms, each more grand than the last. But the beauty was overshadowed by an oppressive cold that seemed to seep into their bones. Clara lit a fire in the grand fireplace, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill. As night began to fall, Lucy, exploring her new surroundings, came running to her parents, her face pale. "Mommy, there's a man in the house," she whispered, her voice trembling. John, alarmed, grabbed a baseball bat and began searching the house. But he found no one. "Are you sure you saw someone, Luce?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lucy nodded, tears in her eyes. "He was tall and dark, like a shadow. He was watching me. The night was restless." Whispers seemed to echo through the corridors, and more than once, Clara thought she heard the soft patter of footsteps behind her. But every time she turned, there was nothing. The next morning, as the family settled in, John discovered a door in the basement. It was old, its wood warped, and it was locked tight. Curiosity piqued. He tried every key they had, but none fit. Probably just a storage room, he mused, but Clara wasn't so sure. She could feel a palpable dread emanating from behind the door. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences only intensified. Objects would move on their own, and cold spots appeared randomly throughout the house. Max refused to set foot inside and took to sleeping in the car. One evening, as Clara was reading in the living room, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. The lights flickered, and a shadow passed by her. She screamed, dropping her book, but when John came running, there was nothing there. The family tried to rationalize the events, attributing them to the house's age and their overactive imaginations. But deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. One night, as they sat down for dinner, the lights went out completely. A cold wind blew through the house, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, they heard a voice, soft and menacing. "Leave," it whispered. Terrified, the Mansons huddled together, praying for the night to end. But the worst was yet to come. In the dead of night, Luce's screams pierced the silence. John and Clara rushed to her room, finding her bed empty. A trail of wet footprints led to the basement door, which now stood ajar. With trepidation, John descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, he found Lucy, standing in front of the locked door, her eyes blank, her voice chanting in a language he didn't recognize. The door began to shake violently, and a deafening roar echoed through the house. John grabbed Lucy, pulling her away just as the door burst open, revealing nothing but darkness. The Mansons fled the house that night, never to return. But the memories of their time there would haunt them forever. The house on Elm Street stood empty, waiting for its next victims, its secrets locked away in the depths of the basement. Chapter 2. Unsettling discoveries. The morning sun streamed through the ornate windows of the Manson home, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chilling events of the previous night. Clara, her face pale and drawn, sipped her coffee, her mind racing. The events in the basement had shaken her to the core, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind their new home's dark secrets. While John tried to restore some semblance of normalcy, keeping Lucy occupied with games and stories, Clara began her investigation. In the attic, amidst dusty old trunks and forgotten heirlooms, she stumbled upon a collection of old journals. Their leather-bound covers were worn, and their pages yellowed with age. Opening the first journal, Clara's eyes widened in horror. The pages were filled with cryptic symbols, sketches of rituals, and references to dark powers. The entries spoke of a covenant with an ancient entity, a promise of power in exchange for sacrifices. The more Clara read, the more she felt a growing sense of dread. These journals chronicled the dark practices of the home's previous inhabitants, hinting at a history of witchcraft and dark rituals. Meanwhile, Lucy, left to her own devices, had taken to drawing. But these were not the innocent sketches of a child. They were disturbing images of the shadowy figure she claimed to have seen, its eyes hollow, its form surrounded by an aura of malevolence. The figure seemed to be beckoning, its long fingers outstretched, its mouth twisted in a sinister grin. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive. Unexplained noises echoed through the corridors, soft whispers that seemed to be carried by the wind. But most unsettling was the sound that emanated from the vicinity of the locked room in the basement. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like the beating of a heart, growing louder and more insistent as the night wore on. Determined to uncover more clues, Clara continued her exploration of the house. In a hidden compartment behind an old portrait, she found a collection of talismans and symbols. They were fashioned from bone and metal, each more grotesque than the last. Their purpose was unclear, but Clara felt a wave of revulsion as she held them. They seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and she quickly stowed them away. Seeking answers, the Mansons decided to consult a local historian, Mr. Hawthorne. A gaunt, elderly man with piercing blue eyes, Mr. Hawthorne listened intently as they recounted their experiences. When they finished, he took a deep breath, his face grave. "The house you've moved into," he began, "has a dark history. It was once the residence of a powerful witch, known as Agatha Blackwood. She was rumored to have made a pact with a demonic entity, granting her unimaginable power. But such power came at a price. The house became a site of dark rituals and sacrifices, and many who entered its walls were never seen again." The Mansons exchanged uneasy glances. But John, ever the skeptic, dismissed Mr. Hawthorne's tales as mere superstition. "These are just stories, old legends meant to scare children," he argued. But Clara wasn't convinced. The evidence was all around them, from Lucy's disturbing drawings to the chilling journals. And as the days turned into weeks, the paranormal activities only intensified. One night, as a storm raged outside, the family was jolted awake by a deafening crash. Rushing downstairs, they found the front door wide open, the wind howling through the house. And in the center of the living room stood the shadowy figure, its form more solid than before, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The Mansons realized, with growing horror, that they were not alone in the house. And whatever resided there with them was growing stronger, feeding off their fear. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and the family found themselves trapped in a waking nightmare, with no escape in sight. As the days turned into a blur of terror, the Mansons realized that they had to act. The entity that haunted their home was growing bolder, its attacks more vicious. And as they delved deeper into the house's dark history, they realized that they were not its first victims. Many before them had suffered at the hands of the malevolent force, and if they didn't act soon, they too would become its next sacrifice. Chapter 3. The first possession. The days following the historian's revelations were tense. The family tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the oppressive atmosphere of the house made it nearly impossible. The walls seemed to close in on them, and every creak, every whisper, sent shivers down their spines. It was during one of these tense evenings that Mark, the eldest son at 17, began to change. At first, it was subtle. He would stare off into space, his eyes glazed over, lost in thoughts only he could fathom. But as the days progressed, his behavior became more erratic. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Mark's voice broke the silence. But it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, more guttural, speaking in a language none of them recognized. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now dark and hollow. He spoke of events from the past, of rituals and sacrifices, of the witch Agatha Blackwood and her dark covenant. Clara, her maternal instincts kicking in, tried to reach out to her son. But as she approached, Mark's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with an iron grip. His strength was unnatural, and Clara cried out in pain. Lucy, witnessing her brother's transformation, screamed in terror. But her cries only seemed to agitate Mark further. In a trance-like state, he lunged at her, his fingers clawing at her throat. John, reacting quickly, pulled him off, pinning him to the ground. But Mark's strength was overpowering, and he threw his father off with ease. The family, in a state of panic, decided to seek medical help. They rushed Mark to the nearest hospital, where he was subjected to a battery of tests. But the doctors were baffled. His vitals were normal, and there was no sign of any physical ailment. They suggested psychological evaluation, but even that yielded no answers. Desperate for a solution, Clara reached out to the local church. Father O'Malley, a kind-hearted priest with a deep knowledge of the occult, listened to their story with growing concern. "This is no ordinary ailment," he said gravely. "Your son is showing signs of demonic possession." The very word sent chills down Clara's spine. Possession? It was the stuff of horror movies, not real life. But the evidence was undeniable. Mark's behavior, his knowledge of events he couldn't possibly know, it all pointed to one conclusion. Father O'Malley suggested an exorcism, a ritual to rid Mark of the malevolent entity that had taken hold of him. But the very idea was met with skepticism. John, ever the rationalist, dismissed it as superstition. There has to be a logical explanation, he argued. But as the days turned into a blur of terror, with Mark's condition deteriorating rapidly, the family had no choice but to consider the unthinkable. They agreed to the exorcism, placing their faith in Father O'Malley and the power of the church. The ritual was set for the following night. The family gathered in the living room, with Mark restrained on the floor. Father O'Malley, dressed in his ceremonial robes, began chanting in Latin, sprinkling holy water around the room. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy. The lights flickered, and a cold wind blew through the house. Mark's body convulsed, and he let out a guttural scream that sent shivers down their spines. The entity inside him fought back, its voice mocking and taunting. "You cannot banish me," it hissed. "I am eternal." But Father O'Malley pressed on, his faith unwavering. The battle of wills raged on for hours, with the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and twist around them. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Mark's body went limp, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The family, exhausted and traumatized, embraced each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. But as they would soon discover, the battle was far from over. The entity that had possessed Mark was just one of many, and the Manson home was a nexus of dark energy. The fight for their souls had only just begun. Chapter 4. The witch's return. The days following Mark's exorcism were a blur of whispered conversations and sleepless nights. The Manson family, once filled with joy and laughter, was now a shadow of its former self. The house, with its dark corridors and creaking floors, seemed to watch them, waiting for its next move. One evening, as Clara was going through the old journals she had found in the attic, she stumbled upon a name that sent shivers down her spine: Agatha Blackwood. The journal spoke of a powerful witch who had once resided in the mansion, practicing dark arts and communing with entities from the netherworld. Agatha was rumored to have discovered the secret to eternal life, a ritual that required a sacrifice of pure souls. As Clara delved deeper into the journal, she realized, with growing horror, that the ritual was to be performed on the night of the blood moon, which was just days away. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The strange occurrences, Mark's possession, it was all leading up to that fateful night. Lucy, who had been unusually quiet since the exorcism, approached her mother one evening, her eyes wide with fear. "Mummy," she whispered, "the witch speaks to me. She says she needs a sacrifice to return to life." Clara, her heart pounding, tried to comfort her daughter. "It's just a bad dream, sweetie," she said, hugging her tight. But deep down, she knew it was much more than that. The paranormal activities in the house intensified. Objects would move on their own, levitating in midair before crashing to the ground. The locked room in the basement, which had remained sealed since their arrival, became the epicenter of the disturbances. At night, the family would hear the sound of the door creaking open, followed by soft whispers and the faint scent of burning herbs. Mark, who had been recovering from his ordeal, began to show signs of possession once again. His eyes, once clear and bright, were now dark and hollow. He would speak in a trance-like state, revealing the witch's plans. "She wants to return," he would whisper, his voice filled with dread. "She needs a sacrifice." The family, already on edge, was dealt another blow when they discovered Max, their loyal German shepherd, dead in the garden. His body was drained of blood, and a strange symbol was carved into his fur. It was clear that the witch was growing stronger, her power reaching its zenith. Desperate for answers, the Mansons decided to confront the entity head-on. Armed with the knowledge from the journals and the talismans they had found, they prepared for the battle of their lives. As the night of the blood moon approached, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy with anticipation. The family gathered in the living room, forming a protective circle around Lucy, who was the most vulnerable. The clock struck midnight, and the ritual began. The room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the blood-red moon that shone through the windows. A cold wind blew through the house, extinguishing the candles and sending chills down their spines. From the depths of the basement, they heard a soft chant, growing louder and more insistent. The locked door burst open, revealing the figure of Agatha Blackwood, her form ethereal and translucent, her eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The battle that ensued was fierce and terrifying. The family, using the talismans, tried to banish the witch's spirit, but she was too powerful. She lunged at Lucy, her fingers clawing at her throat, her mouth twisted in a sinister grin. But just as all hope seemed lost, Mark, summoning all his strength, stepped forward, holding a vial of holy water. With a scream of rage, he threw it at the witch, the liquid burning her skin and causing her to recoil in pain. The family, seizing the opportunity, began chanting a spell from the journal, their voices rising in unison. The room was filled with a blinding light, and with a final scream of rage, the witch's spirit was banished, her form disintegrating into dust. The Manson family, exhausted and traumatized, embraced each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The battle was over, but the scars would remain forever. The house, once a place of terror, was now silent. The locked room in the basement remained sealed, its secrets buried deep within. The Mansons, their bond stronger than ever, decided to leave, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. But as they drove away, a soft whisper echoed through the house, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. The aftermath of the confrontation with Agatha Blackwood left the Manson family in tatters. The once close-knit family was now a fragmented unit, each member grappling with their own demons. The house, with its dark corridors and haunting memories, seemed to amplify their fears, driving a wedge between them. Clara, the pillar of strength for the family, began to crumble under the weight of her trauma. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The nightmares were always the same, disturbing visions of her family's deaths, each more gruesome than the last. She would see John, hanging from the chandelier in the living room, his eyes lifeless. Lucy, drowned in the bathtub, her pale face staring up at her. And Mark, his body contorted in unnatural angles, a sinister grin on his face. The days were no better. The paranormal activities in the house intensified, with apparitions appearing at all hours. Clara would catch glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of her eye, only for them to disappear when she turned to look. She would hear soft whispers, always just out of earshot, their meaning elusive. John, once the rationalist of the family, was driven to the brink. The events of the past weeks had taken a toll on him, and he began to isolate himself from the family. He would lock himself in his study for hours on end, poring over the journals and talismans, searching for answers. His once bright eyes were now hollow, and he had a haunted look about him. One evening, as Clara was preparing dinner, she realized that Lucy was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as she searched the house, calling out her name. But there was no response. All that was left of Lucy were her drawings, scattered across her bedroom floor. The images were disturbing. Shadowy figures surrounding a pentagram, a ritualistic sacrifice, and in the center, a figure that bore a striking resemblance to Lucy, her eyes blank, her mouth open in a silent scream. Mark, still under the influence of the malevolent entity, seemed to be the only one unaffected by the chaos. He would wander the house, his movements deliberate, his voice a soft whisper. One evening, as Clara was searching for Lucy, she stumbled upon Mark in the basement, standing in front of the locked room. "Mark," she cried, relief flooding her. "Have you seen Lucy?" Mark turned to face her, his eyes dark and hollow. "The ritual must be completed," he whispered, his voice sending chills down her spine. Clara, her heart pounding, tried to make sense of his words. "What ritual? Where is Lucy?" Mark's grin widened, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. "She is where she needs to be," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. Clara, her mind racing, realized with growing horror that Lucy was in grave danger. The entity that had possessed Mark was using him to complete the ritual, and Lucy was the key. Desperate to save her daughter, Clara rallied the family, determined to confront the entity head-on. Armed with the knowledge from the journals and the talismans, they prepared for the battle of their lives. The night of the ritual approached, and the atmosphere in the house grew heavy with anticipation. The family gathered in the living room, forming a protective circle around Mark, who was now the epicenter of the disturbances. As the clock struck midnight, the room was plunged into darkness. A cold wind blew through the house, extinguishing the candles and sending chills down their spines. From the depths of the basement, they heard a soft chant, growing louder and more insistent. The locked door burst open, revealing the figure of Agatha Blackwood, her form more solid than before, her eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Beside her stood Lucy, her eyes blank, her body limp. The battle that ensued was fierce and terrifying. The family, using the talismans, tried to banish the witch's spirit, but she was too powerful. She lunged at them, her fingers clawing, her mouth twisted in a sinister grin. But just as all hope seemed lost, Clara, summoning all her strength, stepped forward, holding a vial of holy water. With a scream of rage, she threw it at the witch, the liquid burning her skin and causing her to recoil in pain. The family, seizing the opportunity, began chanting a spell from the journal, their voices rising in unison. The room was filled with a blinding light, and with a final scream of rage, the witch's spirit was banished, her form disintegrating into dust. The Manson family, exhausted and traumatized, embraced each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The battle was over, but the scars would remain forever. The house, once a place of terror, was now silent. The locked room in the basement remained sealed, its secrets buried deep within. The Mansons, their bond stronger than ever, decided to leave, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. But as they drove away, a soft whisper echoed through the house, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 6. The ritual, the Manson home, once a beacon of hope and new beginnings, had transformed into a prison of dread and despair. The locked room in the basement, which had been the epicenter of the paranormal disturbances, beckoned with an eerie allure. Its door, once sealed shut, now stood slightly ajar, as if inviting the family to uncover its dark secrets. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the sound of chanting echoed from the depths of the basement. Drawn by an inexplicable force, Clara and John made their way down the creaking staircase, their hearts pounding in their chests. The dim light from a single candle illuminated the room, revealing a sight that would haunt them forever. The room was adorned with symbols and sigils, drawn in what appeared to be blood. In the center stood an altar, its surface stained with dark, dried liquid. And there, with his wrists bound and a knife in his hand, stood Mark. His eyes, once full of life, were now glazed over, his face a mask of determination. Clara, her maternal instincts taking over, rushed forward, trying to wrestle the knife away from her son. But Mark, under the witch's influence, was stronger than ever. He slashed at her, narrowly missing her throat, his intent clear: to complete the ritual using his own blood. John, seeing his wife in danger, lunged at Mark, trying to pin him down. The two grappled, their struggle echoing through the room. The rest of the family, hearing the commotion, rushed to their aid, leading to a violent confrontation. As the family fought to restrain Mark, Clara, her mind racing, remembered the name of a renowned exorcist she had read about in one of the journals. Father Ignatius, known for his expertise in dealing with demonic possessions, was their last hope. With Mark securely bound, Clara made a desperate call to Father Ignatius, pleading for his help. The priest, after hearing their story, agreed to come to their aid. But he warned Clara of the dangers ahead. "The entity you are dealing with is ancient and powerful," he said gravely. "The ritual Mark is trying to complete will unleash it upon the world. We must act quickly." As night fell, Father Ignatius arrived at the Manson home, his presence bringing a sense of calm to the chaos. He quickly assessed the situation, his eyes narrowing as he took in the symbols and sigils in the locked room. "This is the work of Agatha Blackwood," he said, his voice filled with dread. "She was a powerful witch, known for her dark rituals. We must stop her before it's too late." With the family gathered around him, Father Ignatius began the exorcism. The room was filled with the scent of burning sage and the sound of Latin chants. Mark, still under the witch's influence, writhed and screamed, his body contorting in unnatural angles. The battle of wills raged on for hours, with the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and twist around them. The room grew cold, and a thick fog enveloped them, obscuring their vision. From the depths of the fog, the figure of Agatha Blackwood emerged, her eyes glowing with malevolent intent. But Father Ignatius, his faith unwavering, pressed on. With a final, powerful chant, he banished the witch's spirit, her form disintegrating into dust. Mark, freed from her influence, collapsed, his body limp and exhausted. The Manson family, their ordeal finally over, embraced each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The locked room, once a place of terror, was now sealed shut, its dark secrets buried deep within. Father Ignatius, his mission complete, left the Manson home, leaving behind a family forever changed by their experience. The battle was over, but the scars would remain forever. As dawn broke, the Manson family, their bond stronger than ever, decided to leave the house, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. But as they drove away, a soft whisper echoed through the house, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 7. The exorcism. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden hue over the Manson residence. The house, which had witnessed unspeakable horrors, stood silent, its windows like hollow eyes watching the world outside. Inside, a palpable tension filled the air as Father Ignatius prepared for the exorcism. The family gathered in the living room, their faces etched with fear and anticipation. Mark, his body frail from the ordeal, lay on a makeshift altar in the center of the room. His wrists and ankles were bound with sacred ropes, and a circle of salt surrounded him, acting as a barrier against the malevolent forces that sought to claim him. Father Ignatius, dressed in his ceremonial robes, began the ritual. He lit a series of candles, their flames flickering in the dim light, and started chanting in Latin. The room grew cold, and a thick fog enveloped them, obscuring their vision. As the exorcism progressed, the atmosphere grew heavy with malevolence. The walls seemed to close in on them, and every creak, every whisper, sent shivers down their spines. Mark's body convulsed, and he let out a guttural scream that echoed through the room. The witch's spirit, sensing its impending banishment, fought back with all its might. Objects levitated, shattering against the walls. The room shook, and cracks appeared in the ceiling, raining down debris. John, seeing his son in agony, made a split-second decision. With a cry of determination, he lunged at Mark, placing his hands on his son's forehead. The transfer of energy was instantaneous. Mark's body went limp, while John's eyes turned black, his body contorting in unnatural angles. The witch's spirit, now in control of John, let out a triumphant laugh. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "I am eternal." Father Ignatius, his faith unwavering, pressed on. He held up a crucifix, its surface glowing with a divine light, and began chanting with renewed vigor. The room was filled with a blinding light, and with a final scream of rage, the witch's spirit was banished, its form disintegrating into dust. The aftermath of the exorcism was devastating. John, having sacrificed himself to save his son, lay lifeless on the floor, his body a mere shell. Mark, freed from the witch's influence, was inconsolable, his cries echoing through the house. The family, broken and traumatized, embraced each other, tears of grief and relief streaming down their faces. The battle was over, but the cost had been great. Father Ignatius, his mission complete, offered words of comfort and solace. "Your father's sacrifice was not in vain," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "He saved his son, and in doing so, saved the world from unspeakable evil." The Manson family, their bond stronger than ever, decided to leave the house, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. As they drove away, the house, once a place of terror, stood silent, its dark secrets buried deep within. But as the sun set, casting long shadows over the mansion, a soft whisper echoed through the rooms, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 8. The aftermath. The sun cast long shadows over the Manson residence, its golden hue a stark contrast to the darkness that had once enveloped the house. Birds chirped, and the wind rustled the leaves, but inside, a heavy silence prevailed. The family, once united in their love and joy, was now a fragmented unit, each member grappling with the trauma of their recent ordeal. The days following the exorcism were a blur of whispered conversations, sleepless nights, and tearful embraces. The family tried to rebuild their lives, but the scars of their encounter with the malevolent witch, Agatha Blackwood, remained etched in their souls. Lucy, who had mysteriously disappeared during the chaos, was found wandering the woods near the house. Her once bright eyes were now distant, and she often spoke in riddles, hinting at the witch's imminent return. "She's waiting," Lucy would whisper, her voice filled with dread. "She's biding her time." Clara, consumed by guilt and grief over John's death, became obsessed with ensuring the witch's permanent banishment. She pored over ancient texts and scrolls, seeking knowledge and wisdom. Her research led her to a remote monastery in the Himalayas, where monks practiced rituals to ward off evil spirits. Determined to protect her family, Clara decided to make the perilous journey, leaving her children in the care of her sister. Mark, though physically freed from the witch's possession, was mentally scarred. He was haunted by nightmares, reliving the horrors of his ordeal. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. Therapy sessions and counseling provided little relief, and he often sought solace in the woods, where he felt a strange connection to nature. One evening, as the family was settling down for dinner, a knock on the door broke the silence. Clara, her heart pounding, opened the door to find a mysterious package on the doorstep. The package, wrapped in old, tattered cloth, bore no return address. Inside, they found a key, its surface tarnished with age. A note accompanied the key, its message cryptic, for the locked room. Beware the darkness within. The discovery of the key sent shivers down their spines. The locked room in the basement, which had been the epicenter of the paranormal disturbances, beckoned with an eerie allure. The family, their curiosity piqued, decided to unlock the room and confront the darkness within. As the key turned in the lock, the door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The walls were adorned with symbols and sigils, and in the center stood an altar, its surface stained with dark, dried liquid. The room, though empty, seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, its very presence a reminder of the horrors they had faced. The family, their resolve strengthened by their recent ordeal, decided to cleanse the room, ridding it of its dark energy. They lit candles, their flames flickering in the dim light, and began chanting, their voices rising in unison. The room was filled with a blinding light, and with a final, powerful chant, the dark energy was banished, its presence no longer felt. The Manson family, their bond stronger than ever, embraced each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The battle was over, but the scars would remain forever. As dawn broke, the family, their spirits lifted, decided to leave the house, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. But as they drove away, a soft whisper echoed through the house, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 9. The final confrontation. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the Manson residence. The house, which had witnessed unspeakable horrors, stood silent, its windows like hollow eyes watching the world outside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on them. Clara, her resolve strengthened by her research and the knowledge she had gained, decided to confront the witch's spirit one last time. She had uncovered an ancient ritual, passed down through generations, that had the power to trap malevolent spirits. Armed with this knowledge, she prepared for the battle of her life. The family gathered in the living room, forming a protective circle around Clara. Candles were lit, their flames flickering in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. Clara began chanting, her voice rising in a melodic cadence, invoking the powers of the universe to aid her in her quest. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere grew heavy with malevolence. The walls seemed to close in on them, and every creak, every whisper, sent shivers down their spines. From the depths of the basement, a soft chant echoed, growing louder and more insistent. The witch's spirit, sensing its impending banishment, fought back with all its might. The room shook, and cracks appeared in the ceiling, raining down debris. Objects levitated, shattering against the walls, and a thick fog enveloped them, obscuring their vision. From the depths of the fog, the figure of Agatha Blackwood emerged, her eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "You cannot defeat me," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "I am eternal." Clara, her faith unwavering, pressed on. She held up a vial of holy water, its surface glowing with a divine light, and began chanting with renewed vigor. The room was filled with a blinding light, and with a final scream of rage, the witch's spirit was banished, its form disintegrating into dust. But the battle was far from over. The witch, in a last-ditch effort to save herself, tried to possess Lucy. The young girl's body convulsed, and she let out a guttural scream that echoed through the room. A battle of wills ensued, with Clara and the witch locked in a deadly struggle for control. The house itself became a battleground, with the very fabric of reality seeming to warp and twist around them. The walls bled, and the floor cracked open, revealing a chasm of darkness below. Clara, realizing the gravity of the situation, made a split-second decision. With a cry of determination, she lunged at Lucy, placing her hands on the young girl's forehead. The transfer of energy was instantaneous, with Clara's spirit merging with the witch's, trapping them both in an eternal prison. The aftermath of the confrontation was devastating. Clara, having sacrificed herself to save her daughter, lay lifeless on the floor, her body a mere shell. The family, their ordeal finally over, embraced each other, tears of grief and relief streaming down their faces. The Manson family, their bond stronger than ever, decided to leave the house, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. As they drove away, the house, once a place of terror, stood silent, its dark secrets buried deep within. But as the sun set, casting long shadows over the mansion, a soft whisper echoed through the rooms, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. Chapter 10. Epilogue. The curse continues. The Manson residence, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, now stood as a testament to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. Its once pristine facade was marred by the passage of time, its windows boarded up, and its garden overgrown with weeds. The house, though silent, seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, its very presence a reminder of the dark secrets buried deep within. Rumors of the house's cursed nature spread like wildfire, with tales of its haunted past becoming the stuff of local legend. Parents warned their children to stay away, and the house was left abandoned, a dark stain on the town's history. Years passed, and the memories of the Manson family's ordeal faded into obscurity. But as fate would have it, the house would once again become the epicenter of unspeakable horrors. The Smurl family, unaware of the house's dark past, moved in, setting the stage for the next haunting. Mark, now an adult, had tried to put the traumatic events of his childhood behind him. But the scars of his ordeal remained, haunting his every waking moment. When he heard of the Smurl family's decision to move into the house, he felt a sense of dread wash over him. Determined to prevent history from repeating itself, Mark approached the Smurls, warning them of the dangers that lay ahead. But his pleas fell on deaf ears, with the family dismissing him as a madman, a relic of a bygone era. As the days turned into weeks, the witch's spirit, though weakened by its previous confrontation, began its torment anew. Objects levitated, shattering against the walls, and a thick fog enveloped the house, obscuring the family's vision. The Smurls, once skeptical, were now believers, their lives turned upside down by the relentless nature of the evil that sought to claim them. The cycle of horror continued, with the house feeding off the fear and despair of its inhabitants. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist around them, with the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring. The Smurl family, their lives forever changed by their ordeal, decided to leave the house, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of that fateful night. But as they drove away, the house, once a place of terror, stood silent, its dark secrets buried deep within. But as the sun set, casting long shadows over the mansion, a soft whisper echoed through the rooms, a reminder that evil never truly dies. It merely waits, biding its time, ready to strike when least expected. The story of the Manson and Smurl families serves as a chilling reminder of the relentless nature of evil, its ability to adapt and evolve, and the sacrifices one must make to protect those they love. It pushes the boundaries of the horror genre, delving deep into the psychological and supernatural elements of possession, sacrifice, and the thin line that separates the living from the dead. We hope you have enjoyed our paranormal scary untold story about the Manson family. Please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. Come to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to contact us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professionals team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal Untold Stories.